Hello, I'm Ben. I'm a planner at City of Edinburgh Council. Today in this tour we're going to be exploring Edinburgh's first new town and seeing how it's helped the city adapt to pressures over 250 years, and we'll be looking a bit about what parts of its future might involve as well. So off we go. Edinburgh's new town was conceived as a response to the environmental, social, economic and cultural problems facing Edinburgh in the mid-18th century. In the 1750s, the old town was considered to be in ruinous character, poorly accessible, dark with bad air and lacking in public buildings and facilities for trade. It was losing its best families to London, capital of the still recently established Union. It was proposed to create a new town to the north, accessed by bridging the intervening valley and tackling the North Loch below the Castle Rock. A public competition for a plan was held, won by the 23-year-old James Craig. Craig's simple plan, adopted by the city in 1767 and subsequently joined by successive planned extensions, has proven remarkably adaptable over the years. Uses and individual buildings have changed over time, and pressures for modern commercial floor space or ways of accommodating the rise of the car have had their impacts, but the basic grid and hierarchy of streets has endured.
LDA Design are master planners, landscape architects, urban designers. We're working across the built environment in different sectors. We started working on the George Street project in 2017. The project's been running for quite a number of years. It started in the early 90s, looking at proposals for George Street. LDA Design's involvement in 2017 was really to take forward the concept design. We were looking at refreshing the objectives and principles with the stakeholders at the time, and then building upon that to create a new concept. I think the biggest pressure that George Street currently faces is economic recovery post-COVID. It's obviously a huge issue for a whole number of cities, but particularly with pressures such as the St James Centre development, it's all the more important to improve the economic potential of George Street. So we generally take quite a participatory approach to design, so we'd like to work with communities and stakeholders to inform the design proposals, so that was very much built into the design process. Looking really at turning the city carbon neutral by 2030. So one of the biggest changes for George Street was the almost complete removal of traffic from the city centre in Edinburgh, and that meant that when we were looking at proposals we could really transform the space and put the emphasis much more on people and much less about vehicles. I think Edinburgh City Council are looking for this to be a global exemplar. It really is a kind of unprecedented scale, being almost a kilometre long, and we're looking at quite transformational change that introduces measures that impact the climate emergency and the resilience of the city, as well as obviously boosting visitor attraction potential. So I think it really is a very prominent project for the city, and one that will be hopefully internationally recognised.
We're about to meet Martin Perry, who for the last 15 years has been leading an ambitious project to redevelop the St James Quarter.
So we got involved in this project back in 2005. We put an offer in to buy what was the old Scottish offices that sat on the site, and below those Scottish offices was a trading shopping centre. So the Scottish offices were derelict. They were owned separately. We did this by an analysis that the business does, which is looking at all of the cities around the world that it chooses to deploy its capital and expenditure into. In the UK there are 3 cities, of which Edinburgh is obviously one of those. And you then look for the opportunities in the variety of sectors as to where you might want to go. This came up, bought the 2 parts of the site independently and put them to, effectively brought them together for the first time since they were first built originally, and that enabled us to get an investment improvement just from buying the 2 aspects and bringing them together. We were very keen right from the beginning to avoid there being damage to the city, and so many of these large-scale developments end up damaging and pulling away from the city. And there was already a piece of that happening because the East End was where the opportunities were, and the West End was pretty solid back in 2008 or 2009 when the planning application was going through. Retail is going through a structural change that we've seen the department sector pretty much destroyed throughout the UK, and the loss of Debenhams, the loss of House of Fraser or Jenner's in the city centre, loss of BHS, and those are large blocks of property that weren't obviously anticipated in 2009. But again, how do we adapt to that? So that the whole concept of the project was to create a sort of a dynamic circuit, a shopping retail circuit that used Princes Street, that used George Street, that came into Moultries Walk, that came into St James and then back onto Princes Street. So it has all of the ingredients to allow there to be future regeneration that works within that, because what you're doing is driving and creating pedestrian flow. And there is a great opportunity that's coming forward, of which, if it's thought about in the master plan that we've got there, you can see how they can regenerate, and you can see the city centre regenerating well.
We finished this 2021 Congress tour where construction of the new town began, St Andrew's Square. The square's privately owned garden used to be closed to the public, but in 2008 it was redesigned and opened up to public access. More recently, aspects of its history have also been opened up, as we'll hear from Professor Sir Geoff Palmer of Heriot-Watt University.
We're standing in St Andrew Square in the middle of Edinburgh, and the statue behind me is of a very famous politician. His name is Henry Dundas. He's the first Viscount Melville. He was involved in the abolition of the slave trade. Now, this is in the 1790s when William Wilberforce and Prime Minister Pitt were involved in deciding that the slave trade should be abolished. Henry Dundas in 1792 actually put down an amendment counter to William Wilberforce's that the slave trade should be immediately abolished. Dundas amended it to say that the slave trade should be gradually abolished. And that was accepted. And that one word delayed the abolition of the slave trade from 1792 to 1807, 15 years. During that time, I think about 630,000 African people were transported into slavery. What was evident was when you looked at his plaque, the word slavery wasn't on it. And this statue's been there for over 200 years. So the council decided to look at the plaque, and they invited 4 of us. 2 people in the group said, oh, Dundas was an abolitionist because it was gradual abolition, which I thought was a terrible play on words. However, there was this impasse. We couldn't agree on a narrative, and the committee was disbanded before George Floyd's death. I gave a talk in the park, near the Parliament, and I related the history of Edinburgh Dundas. And the leader of the council contacted me and said he was going to revive the committee. And he asked me whether I would join, and I said yes. And within 5 days, we had a new narrative for Henry Dundas's plaque, and it's standing over there. On that plaque, on the new plaque, which is going to be permanent, it says that he gradually abolished the slave trade, causing thousands of people, African people, to be transported into slavery. Now, that has been a tremendous achievement, and people have contacted me because the council had the courage and the foresight. Many of us in the black community are really grateful that this truth about what he did, the public can now read it.